It is Thursday, July 20th, 2023, and you are watching the MMA Eco Live podcast. And I'm your host, as always, Chris Bresnell, owner of MMA Ecosystem, also work for Tapology as well. I've worked as a manager, written for a lot of different MMA media sites in the past. But for now, just trying to cover the Asian MMA scene and give you the latest updates, highlight prospects, all that good stuff, much more good stuff to come. And today is, I believe, the 17th episode of this show, which I'm very excited for. Got a lot of really fun fights this weekend going on, kind of nothing really on like a huge global stage, but a lot of really great local shows going on throughout Asia. So that's really exciting. A couple things first. I teased on the YouTube page that I was going to use a much better microphone. You all know every time I'm on here, I'm like trying to make little small upgrades to how this looks for you all, how it sounds, just little by little, becoming more professional, more comfortable, enhancing the overall podcast viewing or listening experience. And you may notice I use just this little clip-on microphone. Didn't cost me much money. But I did upgrade to a much better microphone that's better for podcasting. And with a little bit of help from a guy you may know is Drake Riggs, who lives in the area and was getting rid of some podcasting equipment that he had not used much before. He is very much more experienced with both podcasting and live interviews than I am. So he got to hang with him for a little bit and take a big mic off his hands. But unfortunately, I was a cable short for having that this week. So I am putting in an Amazon order as soon as the show is over, and I will have that next week. By the way, if you all hear any dad, grandpa groans from me today, I am still reeling from this mountain that I climbed this last Sunday in Central Oregon called South Sister. I probably got the worst sunburn of my entire life. So usually, like, to show you, you probably can't see much of that, but usually sunburns for me last like 36 hours or so, 36, 48 hours. This one is still extremely sensitive 5 days after the fact. It's the longest it's ever been for me. And if you're unfamiliar with the geography of the American Pacific Northwest, a lot of the climate, the landscape is determined by volcanoes. So there's lots of kind of singular peaks throughout the Pacific Northwest. Well, my wife and I, we went and climbed one called South Sister, which is one of the tallest in the Northwest. It's in Central Oregon. You can do it without any kind of technical gear. It takes it took us about 8 hours to go up and down. Started at 6 a.m. And, you know, I learned a valuable lesson. Sunscreen has to be applied for me about every 2 hours or less if I'm like working. So I had backpacks on, sweating, moving a lot, and I applied sunscreen once and it must have just all rubbed off. So I got annihilated. And I've been in extreme pain all week. So sorry if I'm a little bit like, if I'm making any of that noise. It's because of the burn. Feeling the burn today, guys. But I believe that is all of the non-MMA stuff to get to. I'm going to go ahead and get into some of these events for the weekend. And you may know the drill. If you're new here, you can drop a question in the comments. Doesn't matter if it's your first time or you are a continual listener. Go ahead and throw those questions in there. I will try to touch on as many as I can. Keep it kind, keep it civil. We try to avoid any kind of like racist conversations, asking about race here, as that can get kind of touchy. And just like some feedback I've had from some listeners is people ask, why can't I ask about race? Because I'll tell you why. It's because I've had other listeners that were listening for a while that are from some of these countries that have stopped listening because because they feel really anxious and uneasy. And as a podcast host, I want this to be a safe place for everybody. I want this to be a place where people don't have to feel anxious, where the temperature of their blood doesn't have to boil. And while I touch on a lot of cultural things on this podcast, I don't want it to become a show about politics necessarily. That's not necessarily what this is about. So try to keep questions away from like, what do you feel about this race of people, or like, why do this race of people always do this? Try to stay away from that. It's just not really questions that I'm here to answer. I've already had to block a couple people, so don't be afraid to do more of it. But let's get into some of these events on a much lighter note, not to keep things dark. But if you have not already, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Really trying to push hard to 1,000 subscribers, where we can get things monetized. And then once we get things monetized, I'm able to put some investment back into the channel, and then things are going to grow so much quicker. So really appreciate that if you subscribe to the video. Also, see, just making sure, okay, making sure we're all set here. So this is why you all tune into this show, because this right here. What other podcast show do you listen to that you're going to hear about the Liangshan Torch Festival in Sichuan province of China? I guarantee you no other MMA podcast, especially in English, we're going to be talking about this. But little does most of the wider English-speaking world know that there's an MMA event going on tomorrow in Sichuan province in China, featuring some of China's best prospects in the whole world. This is kind of a one-off event. There's this cultural festival going on in Sichuan province held by the E ethnic minority. It's Y-I, pronounced E. And there's no fighters in the UFC from this ethnic minority. But I guarantee you in the next 2-3 years, you're going to see a couple more come into the UFC from the E ethnic minority. There's a lot of really good fighters fighting in China right now. And there's a couple that I'll highlight here in a second that are really good prospects. But this cultural festival, which I know I'm not going to be able to accurately explain it, especially as an English-speaking white American, but from what I could understand, there is a torch festival celebrated by this ethnic minority that sort of commemorates. There's a couple different legends that go into it. The most like basic, vague answer I could give is just as the E people look forward to the future, to the harvest, they are lighting torches to ward away any kind of evil spirits that would mess with the weather, production, harvest, all of those things. That's a very basic, like the most like kindergarten level explanation that I could give you. There's a lot more sophisticated, a couple different legends that go into it, but there's a torch festival going on currently in Sichuan province in China. That's kind of southwestern China, and that if you have heard of the Unbull Fight Team, that is the same province that they're based in, and a lot of Tibetan fighters and some E fighters that fight out of Unbull Fight that have produced so many good fighters. So this festival, the organizers of this festival, at least in this one town, Liangshan, have decided they want to put on MMA fights as part of their like offering. It's not just the Torch Festival, but it's also lots of different concerts, just sort of events that will attract crowds, entertain people. So they want to put on MMA fights. So they've brought in a lot of fighters from Unbull Fight to fight at this event, and it's going down on July 21st. I believe it starts at 4 a.m. Pacific, 7 a.m. Eastern. And I haven't the only broadcast that I have been able to find for this event is on the Unwall Fight Douyin page. I don't know if that's going to be any kind of clean broadcast or if it's just going to be some teenager running around with a phone, just filming cage side. I don't know what that's going to be like, but either way, I'm really going to try and follow this whole event, because listen to some of these fighters that are fighting at the Liangshan Torch Festival, and there's only one of these I've actually been able to like figure out the whole fight. But WLF featherweight champion Huang Yele fighting against a guy named Samuel. That's a featherweight fight, most likely the main event, potentially the #1 prospect in all of China. Huang Yele is fighting at the event. Xie Bin, who has fought for Contender Series and for Road to UFC, he will be fighting at the event. He's coming off a win and won Pride MMA. Agulali, told you about E-Fighters. He's a really young, really exciting prospect who trains out of Unwall Fight. Cho Lun, also from Road to UFC and Contender Series. He is fighting a Brazilian guy named Desuvan Souza, who I believe lives in China, Brazilian guy that lives and trains there. Lita Tongwu, he is another E guy that has been recently brought into the UFC Shanghai PI, ranked really well in their system, kind of middle of the pack, but he is a great prospect. He is undefeated. De Wong, who is a Tibetan guy, trains out of Unwall Fight. Ruge Jun, of course, these are the Chinese kind of transliteration of their names, and he's another Tibetan guy. Gushi Pengchu, Inshang Zhao, he's from Yonbo Fight. He's not an Unwall guy, and there's more. There's 16 fights in total, but those are all the names I've been able to confirm. There's a couple fighters, foreign fighters in there that I only know their first or last name. So I'll try to and I've asked around. I've asked a manager who is connected to most of those fighters to see if they can provide a full fight card for me, and they're trying to get that. So, but needless to say, really big event, at least featuring a lot of China's best prospects, guys that I've been following for a long time. So stay tuned. I'll try to post more of what I can find on that. That's really all I know about it right now. Like I said, airs on Unwall Fight's Douyin page, but some of China's very best prospects in this cultural festival. So that's the Liangshan Torch Festival. Happy to share some of the love from there. And let's go on. And also tomorrow in the Philippines, always interested to see when events are coming up on the Philippines, but Centurion FC, who I believe Centurion is a Brazilian organization, maybe Middle Eastern, not really sure, but they kind of hop around the globe, pop up in random places. They are having an event in Manila tomorrow. So let me share this card for you, because most likely you have not heard about it. No top level international prospects, but lots of Filipino fighters. So interested to see what will come out of that. So here is Centurion FC 30. Main event, you've got Mario Sismundo against Jean-Jacques Labuya. Kimbert Elitazon against Marvin Malunas. Got some kickboxing and boxing fights in there. Elias Duran. That name sounds familiar. I feel like he was on a show, maybe a one championship show. Ernie Braca, Mark Julian Itas, Junifer Kimyong, Raul Rosoro, and Radon Romero. Looks like they've got kind of a four-man welterweight tournament going on there. So a lot of Filipino guys on there. Like I said, not a lot of top-level prospects that I would say, but some could emerge. You got this guy Marvin, who's 3-0, Elias Duran 3-1, and then Kimbert Elitazon is 4-2. So got a couple fighters there that you might want to keep an eye on. This event airs on Fight TV, and that's an app that specializes in combat sports broadcasting. And sometimes events on there are free. Sometimes you have to use like a pay-per-view system. This event, I looked it up, and this is with the Fight TV Plus subscription. So that is $8 a month, and you get all the whatever promotions are included in the Fight TV Plus subscription plan. So that's how to watch this event, and that, I believe that start time is not correct on there. Let me see what I've got. Okay, so 30 minutes earlier, 7 a.m. Eastern, 4 a.m. Pacific, is Centurion FC. I'll see if I can find out a way to find results on that. I don't have Fight TV Plus, but see if I can find out some results from that. All right, so going on into Saturday. Saturday is a loaded day. Of course, we've got UFC London going on, starting in the morning here in the US, going into the afternoon. No Asian fighters on that card, but before that, if you want to catch Asian MMA, this is your time. So Saturday morning, we've got 3 Chinese events going on about the same time. For me, they start at 4 a.m., 4:30, 5 a.m., and then you've got Black Combat event. Of course, that's not going to be aired live. Catch that after the fact, probably look up results. You've also got Octagon 47, which is a Kazakh event. So let's get into a couple of these. I'm not going to get into all of them, but this Black Combat event, it's one of their numbered events. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see that one, because I do look forward to seeing the results from this Black Combat event. So why I'm excited for this Black Combat event, we've got 3 title fights. The flyweight title fight is all right. Lee Jung-young, this guy right here, 5-1. Pretty good record, but waiting to see kind of him to fight some more experienced fighters. This guy, 6-5. You've got Park Chan-soo, who is fighting at featherweight. A pretty good prospect, fought some tough competition, so his record is a little more mixed, but still believe highly in Park Chan-soo there. The main and co-main event I'm really looking forward to. Cho Jun-seo, this guy right here, one of the prospects that I am highest on out of Korea, fights at middleweight, and he's just 22 years old, you see there, and his record pretty good. He hadn't really fought much tough competition. He fought Kim Young-kyun in his last fight. It's not necessarily the competition, but he's just looked really good fighting all these guys, and he's going to be fighting another pretty experienced guy in Choi Won-jun at Black Combat. So he's a guy that I've been told about from other listeners, from other fans, that I should keep an eye on him. So we'll definitely be doing that. Can't wait for the video to come out of his fight. And the main event of this Black Combat Civil War event got Yoo Soo-young fighting Kim Dong-kyo. And Yoo Soo-young, another one of the top prospects coming out of Korea. He is a BJJ black belt, and he is the champ in Black Combat at bantamweight, I believe. But he is a very sharp guy. He's got a great record, really good grappler, and he is fighting another guy. All these guys are kind of similar records. But interesting thing about Yoo Soo-young is that he's also the NYSA FC bantamweight champion. Is that right? For some reason, I want to say featherweight. Okay, yeah. The bantamweight championship there. And he's also the champ in NYSA FC. And I saw NYSA put out this poster a couple weeks ago promoting Yoo Soo-young defending his NYSA FC title in Kazakhstan against another guy. Let me pull up this guy. Let me pull up this guy's name. Because I was a little bit skeptical, because I was like, I'm pretty sure he will be defending his title in Black Combat in July, and then they're scheduling him for a title fight in August as well. But it's true. NYSA FC 53, he is going to be defending his title. At least he is scheduled to, against a guy named Joldosh Beck. And I reached out to his manager. And I was like, hey, man, is this true, or is this kind of just hot air? Because Niza will do that. They'll kind of put out these posters that are like, what do you think of this fight? And it's like, I have to read the caption to see if the fight's actually happening. But he's like, yeah, it's true. We're trying to stay healthy and make this fight happen in August as well. So, good Lord. Title defense in 2 different promotions, 2 different countries, back-to-back months. But yes, he's a busy guy. He's an active champion in 2 different organizations defending his belt. So Yusuf Young, see if he comes out healthy and if he's able to finish the fight quickly. Interesting storyline going on there. So there you have it. That is Black Combat 7. And then on the China side of things, there's a couple events going on Saturday. One is Dragon FC. That is going down. Where's old Dragon FC going down? It's going on in a city called Daya, which is in Hubei province. It's a mixed event, both kickboxing and MMA. But a couple MMA fights, all the MMA fights are pretty interesting. The main MMA fight that you've got going on is against Road UFC 2023 alum, Ibugala, Mongolian Chinese guy. He's been already picked up for another fight following his appearance in Road UFC in May. He'll be fighting Kengo Fujimura of Japan. So he's a JCK belt holder in the past, really successful, really popular fighter. He's fighting in Dragon FC this Saturday. And then probably the fighter that is getting the most headlines for this event is Wang Zong. 1-0, a female flyweight fighter, I think. I think she's flyweight. Yeah, she's going to be fighting at flyweight. That's what I was told. But she is pegged as many as to be a future UFC. Kind of think almost like a female Alex Pereira. They're wanting to get her into the UFC by the end of the year. Really talented striker kickboxer. Holds a decision win over Valentina Shevchenko in kickboxing. And they're wanting to get her into the UFC as soon as possible. Currently only has 1 MMA fight, so that could be a tall order. But if she's able to follow a similar kind of track and timeline as Alex Pereira, they want to get her into the UFC as soon as possible and give her the short track to the UFC title. That's the dream of a lot of fighters, but not everyone has a kickboxing win over Valentina Shevchenko. So that's what they want, to get her into the UFC as quickly as possible. So she will be fighting a Japanese fighter, Tei Murayama. And yeah, interested to see how that goes. Also on the card, you've got T. Hai Tao, who's a young veteran, a young guy with a lot of fights, who I think has some potential. He has some potential. He's fighting a guy named Nishida Sho from Japan. And then another pretty solid prospect, Ju Kung Jie, fighting Korean fighter Lee Mun Hyuk. So 4 pretty good fights at Dragon FC. That starts at 4:30 a.m. Pacific, 7:30 a.m. Eastern. Not totally sure on the broadcast on that, but I'm still looking for that. Hard to find out some of these details when I'm looking through WeChat articles and trying to figure things out. So, and of course, doesn't help that I'm not Chinese. So working on my Chinese every day, but it's a struggle, guys. And then, gosh, another Chinese event is Bulletfly FC 19. Not really going to go through this card except the main event featuring Li Hao Jie, another JCK belt holder in the past at bantamweight. Very talented fighter. At one time was on this epic win streak up in the teens, 15, 16, 17 fight win streak. But he is fighting for Bulletfly FC against a one championship veteran, Liupeng Shuai. So that's Bulletfly FC starting at 5 a.m. Pacific, 8 a.m. Eastern. Again, I think their last event aired on Douyin, but I have not been able to find the results at all from their last event that happened in April. So if anyone knows how to get the results from Bulletfly FC 18, please let me know, and I can add those to the fighters' records in Tapology. And then the other Chinese events going on this weekend is Fight King. or Fight King International Gold Belt Championship. They have got back-to-back days going on Saturday, Sunday in Hohhot in Inner Mongolia province. And I haven't been able to confirm a lot of the fights for these events. So there's, yeah, like I said, back-to-back days and a couple fighters that are it's a China versus international fighters kind of thing. So Zhou Qiyang, who has fought on some one championship kind of Road to One Hero Series kind of shows. He was fighting on the show against a guy named Ali from Russia, Li Fuyao against Alioni from Russia, and Bida Liya against a guy named Ganbatar Bat Iridwe. That's on Saturday. And then on Sunday, now these are the fights that I think are really interesting. A fighter that could punch her way into the UFC with a win, Yan Qihui of Dana White's Contender Series, will be fighting fellow female Chinese veteran Ding Miao at featherweight. So that's a pretty good fight. Maybe a little bit uneven in terms of skill. Yan Qihui is a really tough opponent for Ding Miao, but at least Yan Qihui fighting someone with at least a sizable record. So not a lot of options trying to find really experienced competition within China. So Ding Miao might be the best that they could find. Zhao Zhikang also on the card, pretty good prospect, and Lu Junyong, who is an alternate in Road to UFC this year. He is also on the card. Not sure who those guys are fighting. So that wraps up the Chinese events. Not sure on broadcast plans, but same as always, I'll let you guys know what I find. Let's see. I guess the only other, there's two more that I'll go through. Shooto has a pretty good event this Sunday. Sometimes those events can be hit or miss, but let me share with you this card because I really like this card a lot. Maybe the best Asian MMA card this weekend. All right, so Shooto 2023 Volume 2. Lots of interesting fights on here. So main event is the Shooto strawweight champion Joe Arai against Shooto Aki. Joe Arai, you look at his record, and it doesn't really stick out to you very much. Kid's 25 years old. He's got a 13-9-2 record. But you look at his record, he won a couple fights, and then he lost 7 fights in a row. And amassed this really rough record. And I was looking at the guys that he fought, and it just looked like he was fighting way out of his league for a little while. Japanese MMA matchmaking, I gotta be honest, is some of the worst in the world. Really strange fights. Let's just look at this kid's record. So he kind of had a normal record here, and then they just threw him up against a lot of guys that are way more experienced, way better records, or at least just way more fights. And look at this. He lost 8 fights in a row. Eventually was at 4-9-2. But now something clicked in with Joe Arai, and he's now won 8 in a row, picked up the Shooto 115-pound men's championship, and beaten some really good fighters along the way. So this guy's only 25 years old. So he may not be on a lot of people's top prospects out of Japan list, but don't sleep on this guy. Not sure what kind of future he has. Potentially one championship could be a good option for them since they do have technically a men's strawweight division, even though it is a, quote, hydrated 125 pounds. So there could be that, or he could try to just move up to flyweight proper and make a run there. It doesn't look, this looks like an old picture. I'm guessing this is kind of an old picture. But yeah, Joe Arai, pretty good prospect out of Japan. Also got Japanese women's legend Emi Fujino fighting this woman Shiho. Very strange matchup there. And then 2 prospects that I really want to put on your radar. If you watched my video about Japanese prospects under the age of 25, 2 guys that were on that list were Ryuya Iwamoto, who is a 6-0 featherweight, and also Wataru Yamauchi, who's a flyweight, 5-0. Both of these guys, really like both of them. Watch some of their stuff. They're really good fighters. So be watching for those, for the results from this event. Shooto, I think that's an internet pay-per-view off a site. And if this time is correct, 5 a.m. Eastern, 2 a.m. Pacific. So there you have it, Shooto. And then wrapping up the week, this is actually next Tuesday, but I wanted to just briefly hit on this WLF MMA event because I haven't really put anything out there. I'm going to probably put a post out on Instagram later today covering a lot of the Chinese events coming up in the next couple days. But WLF, their monthly show is on July 25th in their studio headquarters in Hunan province. And they're doing, their last show was a Mongolia versus China event. This show is China versus Russia. So big shout out to Wrestle Jamia for helping me ID a couple of those fighters, but still trying to figure out who some of the Russian fighters are on this card. But as far as the Chinese fighters, you've got Feng Tianhao in the main event. Really good prospect out of China, another top guy. Nika Dan, who is a Tibetan guy, he is fighting on the card. Zhang Qinghe, Juwan Tsai, Ahajang Ali Nuar, that's a really fun fighter. Zhang Shi Zhen, and Liu Yongqiang. So that will air on WLF MMA's Douyin channel, and then over time they'll put out more videos on some social media platforms. All right, so that was a lot to get through. Thank you so much for hanging with me. Don't know if that's interesting at all to you guys. I love just like going through all those things because the thing is like there's no one in Western media that's like propping up these events, telling you to check them out, or at least very few. A couple on the Japanese side of things, but love giving the Asian fighters a little bit of a platform. Sometimes it's hard if you're living outside of that country to know how to watch these events, but trying to put those pieces together for you so you know how to watch them if you want to. So let's get into some of your questions. All right. Liangshan, Torch Festival, woo. So on your threads, you talked highly about Black Combat 7. How big do you think it will be compared to Road FC someday? You know, that's a good question. The format of these two events, the format of Black Combat, really against anything else, is so different. And it already seems like Black Combat has more of a following than any other Korean promotion. Really popular promotion already. It's just the format. In some ways, it like doesn't make sense to me because all the logic in my head says that MMA fans want to watch fights live. And if you're doing things by tape delay, then it's just gonna be hard. Like, it's hard to cover events on tape delay in the media. I know we do it every week with Ultimate Fighter, but Ultimate Fighter doesn't have like this massive cult following. It seems like Black Combat has that cult following. They're able to keep that going. Now, maybe Ultimate Fighter did have that cult following at the beginning. The viewership was definitely much better. And part of that is just, I think, due to changing viewing habits among Western, cord cutting, all that stuff. But so in one sense, it doesn't make sense to me how they're doing so well putting videos on YouTube. But at the same time, the fact that there is no paywall, I think, really helps them. And it doesn't feel overly formulaic. I think that's the thing. I think Ultimate Fighter has started to feel just like a very well-oiled machine. Fighter A versus Fighter B from this team and that team. We spend the whole episode going through training. Fighter gets an injury. Fighter having trouble making weight. Sob stories. You don't know how much I've sacrificed to be here. Two fighters fight. Coaches throwing playful jabs. It literally is the exact same thing and has been that way really ever since the beginning. Whereas like it doesn't feel like Black Combat is like, it feels a lot more unscripted, feels a lot more off the books, and the opposite of formulaic. And I also think just that there's a lot of new young creators behind Black Combat that have some really big personalities, and that I think that's like part of the magic behind it. Whereas like Road FC is, they've traditionally been a more traditional, more a more typical kind of promotion. I think we will always need that, but they've transitioned to more of a tournament format. I don't know how that's been working for them in terms of viewership. It is interesting to me that a lot of the Korean fighters, they tried to match up a lot of Korean fighters with foreign fighters. A lot of the Korean fighters got knocked out of this first round of the tournament. So that's interesting to me. Wondering like how much Road FC can command the public's attention. And a lot of what I've been seeing a lot of Korean promotions do is implement some kind of like documentary series on YouTube to kind of, I don't know, compete with, but they're noticing what Black Combat is doing, and they're trying to have something on YouTube for free, kind of in a documentary style. So I think that both will be able to coexist. I think that there's first of all enough Korean talent for there to be multiple healthy promotions in Korea right now. AFC has a lot of great fighters. Road FC has good fighters too, and Black Combat has a lot of good fighters. So the ecosystem is big enough in Korea to support multiple organizations. So I don't think that like Road or AFC are going to be going away anytime soon. Road has shrunk definitely, but I think that they're doing the right thing right now. But in terms of like raw command of their audience and audience loyalty, Black Combat I think is doing the right thing. I wonder if they're going to ever do some kind of live stream or live broadcast, but how is that going to connect with their documentary style where they can edit things and kind of direct traffic of what they want to showcase? I think that is the biggest question for them. But man, at one point I heard a rumor a long time ago about some kind of potential partnership with Netflix and Black Combat. That was a long time ago, and I don't know if that's still in play. But you look at shows on Netflix like Physical 100, which featured a couple Korean MMA fighters. I feel like something like the stage is set. Black Combat could be perfect for Netflix. Like it's ideal. There's already man, Physical 100 was really big in the States. I talked to so many people that don't care anything about MMA, but typical like Americans of all different races that watched Physical 100 and were asking me if I knew about the MMA fighters. And they knew the MMA fighters' names. They probably never watched a UFC event in their lives, but it was really big here in the States. And man, I think that'd be a really good collab. I don't know if Netflix doesn't really do any kind of live programming, but if Black Combat could figure out how to do live programming and not take away from the product that they have right now, I think that they could really blow up, especially reaching outside of the Korean market for sure. Let's see. James Kendrick. Azat didn't look too good against Tyson Nam. How much do you think is Azat not used to high-level competition in your breakdown, or Nam being second career resurgence? I think could be some Octagon jitters, could be taking a step up in competition. And I think Tyson Nam's pretty well-rounded, so I think it was a combination of a couple things. His next performance I expect a lot more of. Kind of expected him to not blow the doors off of the UFC Apex in his first performance, but I think we'll probably see a better performance from him in the future. What is your opinion on Kyoji Horiguchi never fighting John Dodson in 2021? They could have made that fight in the UFC. They could have made that fight in Ryzen. And they still can, right? Like John Dodson, is he still fighting with Ryzen? Or is he that's a guy I lose track of very, very quickly. John Dodson, I thought that he was still with Ryzen. Oh, that's why I'm confused. He has been alternating between bare knuckle and Ryzen. So his next fight is in bare knuckle August 11th. So I think we could still get the fight. Like it's never been scheduled, it looks like. Yeah, I think that they should definitely make it. He's 2-0 with Ryzen, and I think that's the fight to make for sure. Especially if Koji Horiguchi, of course, I guess that's more of a Bellator fight, against Takahashi. But yeah, that's the fight to make. I would love to see that. That would be a huge fight, big for both guys, honestly. Two former competitors or challengers of Demetrius Johnson, just like kind of eternally good flyweights. So for sure. How hard is it to stay healthy during a fight camp generally? Is it true that most fighters are less than 70% when they come to big fights? I would say that's true. That sounds about right, 70%. Even if a fighter's telling you that they're 100%, like, I mean, they have they got something that hurts for sure. Even if it's not like an injury, they got something. I mean, how do you train and spar? I know there's some guys that will pull back and not really spar much, which I think is really smart. I don't think that you need to spar as much as some fighters think that you need to. So I think that's smart to pull back on sparring, but that sounds about right to me. Will you be doing a look at Rabindra Dant's skills like you did with Azat? I thought that was really good because you were very respectful and fair, unlike most analyst dudes who are rude. Yeah, I do try to give an honest assessment. I'm not there just to like, I'm never trying to be any fighter's fan club, and I'm never trying to, I guess I recognize that people are watching these videos trying to like get insight on like betting. So I want to give an honest and accurate representation of a fighter. And honestly, most of the fighters that I choose to do that, I'm going to be I know I've only done that for 2 fighters. And if you'll remember, the first guy that I did for that was Rana Rudra for Road to UFC. And I had a lot of pretty intense criticism of his skills, but I also wanted to respect that he had been chosen for Road to UFC, and that there were some things that he had done well. Obviously, he won those fights. He had won those fights, or I guess he had lost one and then won 2 fights before being chosen for Road to UFC. So there were some positives to take from his game, but I was very honest, but tried to be very respectful as well. And in an MMA fight, you never know what will happen. And in both of those, if you'll remember, I perfectly called the result of both of those fights. In the Rana Rudra, I called a first round ground and pound TKO finish from Lee Chong Ho in Road to UFC, and that happened. And then I believe I called a decision win for Azat Maxim in his UFC debut, which is what we got, albeit by split decision. So yeah, I try to be really honest with assessing fighters, and I don't have one in the works for Rabindra Dant. I think for me to make a video on assessing a fighter's skills, it needs to be a bigger fight or like a big step up for them. So if he's competing on like the Nepali scene, I may not make a video. But if he ever competes internationally, if he goes to like Indonesia and fights another notable fighter, or gosh, even goes to like something like Pro UFC, I would totally make a video for that. My next up for that series will be Asu Amabayev. I'm going to take a look at him and his past 3 fights, see if we can figure out how he's going to do in his first UFC fight. But yeah, love making those videos. Probably not only like they're not only some of the easiest videos to produce, but they are some of my favorite video series. And it also is like the most watched videos that I film are those breakdowns. So I feel like I could be like figuring out my niche a little bit, or like something I really want to, a series I want to commit to. So yeah, appreciate that feedback. You've stated that you weren't quite into kickboxing, but do you have any thoughts or opinions on the rebirth of K1? I mean, it's cool. Yeah, you're right. I really don't follow it, and so I don't have opinions about it, just because I don't like invest a lot of mental energy. I usually don't. I'll be honest, I kind of like skim past a lot of those headlines, but I will say, like, if kickboxing is really, really healthy, everyone wins, right? So if like, I don't know if kickboxing could ever be as big as MMA, but if it is, then I only see that as a win for MMA. It's going to elevate the skills of a lot of fighters, a lot of athletes. It's going to make more people interested in combat sports. So only a good thing. I did hear, I don't know if this was confirmed or a rumor, but that there could also be like an MMA part of the K1 rebirth. So that would be cool for sure. Would be interested to hear how that goes and what their sort of like international schedule would look like for sure. Let's see. Yeah, Jimmy, talking about Wang Tong, right? The girl who has a win in kickboxing over Valentina in the Zhang Wei Li Check group I'm in, they showed that she has some of the highest numbers out of the PI. Yeah, so you're right, and I have the receipts to prove that actually. I have a screenshot of the rankings. Granted, there was only 4 Chinese female fighters that went through the UFC PI Combine this year, but or at least 4 that were chosen. I guess maybe I think there maybe were more, but 4 fighters, and I have this up on my phone here. Number 4, Hailai Wu Samu. So I'm guessing this is out of 1,000 being the highest. Hailai Wu Samu, who is an E fighter, she scored 475 points. Yan Chi Hui, who fights this weekend, scored 530 points. Dong Huaxiang, she scored 719 points. She's number 2. Number 1 was Wang Tong. She scored 789 points, I'm guessing out of 1,000. She was the number 1 female fighter in the UFC PI Shanghai Combine this year. So that tells you something. Man, girl's only 1-0, and she was number 1. She was number 1. Sorry for that SpongeBob reference, but yeah, definitely. Let's see. She's fighting a Japanese girl, Tei Murayama. Don't know anything about her, but keep an eye on her. Let's see. Some dislike for strawweight in the UFC. Let's see. Said that I had trained MMA in the past. What was your favorite strike, or a strike that you really gravitated towards? Well, if y'all can't tell, I am a very tall, lanky guy. I don't know if you want to say spirit animal of a giraffe, or I think gazelle is the best like spirit animal. Really, really long and light, and not a lot of like raw physical strength, but I have a lot of agility and speed. So for me, your boy was all about the jab. I knew that I probably wasn't ever going to be someone to like knock someone out with a flurry of hooks or just like one punch KO kind of guy. But when I was training Muay Thai and MMA, I just like zeroed in on that jab. I actually got a friend who used to be a Golden Gloves boxer and was my very first boxing coach to help me just like work on the jab, use the distance, the speed, all that stuff. And I wasn't able, like, when I would spar guys at Glory MMA on the feet, like, there was a lot of things, most things were really, really hard for me. And I got eaten up. But when I could get that jab going, man, like, it gave guys fits, like, because I could just, I don't know, I need to measure. Like, my wingspan is something ridiculous. It's very disproportionate. I will say that. Really long fingers, really long arms. But yeah, the jab, that I would just hang back and jab guys all day. And some people were just like so frustrated because they're just like, I would spar against these shorter guys that were, 5'6", 5'7", and just like pop them with that jab way out of their range. But that was what I had a lot of fun with. Had a lot of fun with leg kicks too. That I did, along with the jab, probably the thing I practiced the most and got the most compliments from some of the striking coaches at Glory MMA was the leg kicks. And when I had, I don't even know what that was. Was that a smoker fight? Was that an amateur fight? I don't even know. I signed up, I showed up, and I fought a dude that was really, really good in some like warehouse somewhere in Kansas. But I fought this guy, and he won the fight by ground and pound. But before he did, I chewed up this guy with leg kicks. And after the fight, he came limping up to me, and he was like, "Dude, I'm going to be hurting for a long time." So it was like, I was like, at least in my first and only MMA fight, for there to be some positives. I got beaten by TKO, but at least like, you at least want to make the guy hurt a little bit. You want to make him remember that fight, and maybe limp around for a little bit. So, lame stories, I know, but those were the things that I think back on my MMA training, and I was like, okay, maybe I wasn't totally terrible. Pretty bad, but not totally terrible. What do you think of Park Jun-young's nickname, the Iron Turtle? He doesn't really use the turtle position in fights. Well, he does. He is really good at the rear naked choke, right? So maybe in that way, maybe he's like a shell, acting as a shell for somebody. Maybe that's how I think of it. Said for me, an Iron Turtle would be someone like Eduardo Teles. I don't know who that is, who has weaponized the defensive turtle position in grappling competition. Yeah, I'll have to look that guy up. Thank you, Chris. You're welcome. Do you consider Syndicate MMA an elite gym? I heard from Brendan Olivas, who runs the MMA breakdowns and bets that Syndicate comes up with the worst game plans. Do you agree? I don't know. I think that they have a pretty good team going, but because they've like resurrected a couple fighters. They think about like Roxanne Modafferi. She went to Syndicate MMA, and Coach John Wood pretty much resurrected her career. John Wood is a good coach. I don't know who is really behind a lot of the game planning, but now that I think about it, it's not always the best. I think I would agree there that the game planning is not. I'm thinking about like Joanne Wood, Jessica Panay. No, she trained. No, she trains at Alliance. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know if I'm really like thoughtful enough to comment on that, or really know enough to comment on that, but I think I see where you're coming from. Did I know that one has an option to watch fights with no commentary, but they just have ambient sounds of the arena? Oh, really? You wish you could do that to the UFC since the commentary has been really bad. I would not mind doing that. Yeah, that I would love to have that option because I do love. That's like exactly how I love watching a lot of fights. I love hearing the fight, but I don't always love the commentary. I think that's is that on Amazon Prime? If you're still on this, comment on there. If that's on Amazon Prime, that would really be appreciated. I didn't even know that Amazon Prime had that kind of functionality. But yeah, that's great. I am not. There's really only like a couple commentary teams that I really like, and will intentionally use volume when I'm listening to them. Usually like Lorisenko, Paul Felder, John Anik. Throw them in the mix, and I'm more likely to listen. But Invicta has good commentary. I like their commentary most of the time, but a lot of other times I put it on mute. Excuse me. Do you know how Road FC $1 Million tournament works? Is it similar to PFL? I think it's more of a standard tournament, right? That is a good question. I thought it was a little bit more of a standard tournament than PFL system. Man, I'm not a big fan of the PFL system. I don't mind like regular season playoff tournament, but the thing with just like you fight twice and you get matched up with who you get matched up with. It just feels like some fighters have a really hard road, and other fighters get a much easier path. The matchmaking in PFL needs to be a little bit more transparent in their regular season, or they need to make it a little bit more meritocratic in some way. So, yeah, I don't know. I thought that it was a little bit more straightforward than PFL, but I'm not sure. I need to look that up. I admit I'm slacking on that. Jimmy asking, going back to Dodson and Kyoji. The reason I asked that question is that John Dodson, run by style, and Kyoji outside fighting style is the perfect style matchup that produces excitement. Yeah, I agree. Is it clear that Tyro will never be a champion after his embarrassing performance against Chairez? Can he still make the rankings? How far in the rankings do you think he can get? I don't think that was the best performance out of Tyra. I wonder if like the two, you have to realize he had a weight cut, what was it, 2 weeks before that? And then even though it was at a catchweight fight, he still had to probably cut some weight for that. So and it was a short notice opponent. So I don't know if it was the best performance from him. I am starting to wonder a little bit on his ceiling, but then again, like he is still really young, so he could still like get there in 5 or 6 years. Think about Charles Oliveira, guys. Talk about a guy, a really good grappler, who came into the UFC, was submitting some really good fighters. What looked like he might have been like the next young Brazilian phenom, and then he just keeps faltering against top competition. And now here we are. He is fighting for the second time against Islam Makhachev in a year. Former UFC lightweight champion, amazing fighter. And it just took a long time. So it's too early to say that he will never fight for a title, because I think there's a lot of people that have written off Charles Oliveira. They said that he didn't have a chin, and he's figured it out. So who knows? Will Tyra be a UFC champion at age 31? He very well could be. I think he's definitely going to be a ranked fighter and be in the rankings for a good bit. So I don't know. Flyweight's a different beast than even lightweight is. So he might have more success as a really pure grappler, not so much like a heavy-handed power puncher. That style may be more suited to succeed at flyweight than it maybe would at lightweight as Oliveira. But I am starting to have some questions about his ceiling. Long jab. Did you also have a long teep? Yes. I struggled with teep teep kicks for some reason. I'm gonna tell you guys a really embarrassing story about that. So teep kicks, for some reason, I have really long legs, kind of a short torso, long legs, long arms. I'm 6'1" overall, and I have a hard time like straightening my legs fully. So like really getting a full extent on my teep kicks is sometimes hard. It's an area of flexibility I kind of need to work on. But our striking coach at the time at Glory MMA, you guys know a fighter from Uruguay named Gaston Reynaud. Really popular fighter. One of the most popular, if not the most popular MMA fighter to ever come out of Uruguay. I think that now he is doing commentary. I don't know if it's for the UFC or Bellator, but some kind of Spanish-speaking commentary. But he is a really good striker, and he was our like Muay Thai coach, or at least one of our main Muay Thai coaches at Glory MMA. And I was like sparring with him, and I kept trying to throw teep kicks against him, but I just kept pegging him in the junk over and over. Oh, and he got so mad because, you know, the first time you hit a guy in the nuts, they're like, it's fine, you know. But I think I kept doing it because that was like, I think that was maybe something that we had just worked on or practiced, and so I was really trying to do them, and I just kept hitting him in the nuts, and he like took it out on me. He didn't like verbally reprimand me. The way that he took it out is he basically like treated it like a fight. Every time I would stand up, he would like leg kick me and knock me off my feet, or like knee me in the gut like hard. He was so pissed, and I felt really bad, and I apologized to him. This was like right when I first started training, like super white belt level stuff, but yeah, that was not a great day. I felt really bad. But it's like sometimes it's sort of, you think about like a puppy, that's kind of how I see it, is like my legs are like, I just had a hard time controlling my weapons, and I think I've gotten a little bit better at it since, at least like getting the distance for it. But I was throwing the teep kick way too close, so that was why when I would bring it up to throw it, my foot just kept catching him in the groin. Not the guy you want to do that against, but alas. Okay. Yeah. Terrible story there. Let's see. One's no commentary option is on YouTube after fights, not Amazon, unfortunately. So, okay. So after fights. Got it. Open-ended question. When did the UFC product fall off? Was it when they introed Power Slap, the start of the ESPN Plus era, or way before 2019? Okay, so your assumption there is that the UFC product has fallen off. And what I'm interpreting there is that there's something that you really don't like about where the UFC product has gone, which seems to reflect a lot of hardcore sentiment, feeling like the product's getting watered down. I'm guessing you're probably talking about the oversaturation of MMA events, a lot of like corporatization of the UFC, and having a lot of apex fights, sort of this like copy paste rubber stamp model of UFC. I think that started before the ESPN era. ESPN, what that has started is more of like, we have to produce events, period. And it doesn't really matter how good these events are. It's why the UFC has stayed in the apex for as long as they have. It's why they went to why they were so eager to, quote, come out of the pandemic, or at least restart once the pandemic started, because they had contractual obligations to fill. They had to get to Fight Island, they had to host shows at the Apex, all of that. But they've been one of the last, if not the last, sports league to leave the pandemic. They are still operating in a sense like it's 2021, holding shows at the Apex. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but Nolan King for MMA Junkie tweeted like yesterday that the UFC is hosting their October 14th show is at the Apex, as well as their October 7th show is at the Apex. So October of 2023, and we're still having multiple shows in the UFC Apex. And the complaint on these shows, you all are well familiar with it. No theme to the card because there's no localized audience. The main event just has to be like, mid-tier pay-per-view level quality, or like I'm saying, like middle of a pay-per-view main card, or like top of a ESPN prelims level, and then the rest of the card doesn't really matter. This last weekend, of course, that was last minute, but we had Jack Dillon Madalena versus Basel Hafez in the co-main event. Before that, it was Albert Duraev against Park Jun-young, who, as much as I love Park, as great of a fight as that was, unranked fighters that have never been ranked in the co-main event. So a lot of complaint. I get the complaints, and I have absolutely no pushback to those complaints. I'm not going to defend the UFC and say you shouldn't feel that way at all. But I think I don't know if that's ever going to, like, Dana White he keeps saying we're going to come out of this Apex season and we're going to go back on the road. And what this year has not been what they were doing in 2019, where they're going to places like Boise, Idaho, Zagreb, Croatia, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, all these places. But instead, they are signing, their calendar is basically filled up with like these contractual obligations to go to these different locations. They have a contractual obligation to host an event in Singapore once a year. They have contractual obligations to go to Abu Dhabi. I don't know if it's a contractual obligation, but it's more or less just like a promise to go to New York every November. They have a contractual obligation with T-Mobile Arena. They may have one with Australia or Sydney. I can't remember. I don't know if that's a contract, but I think they have some kind of agreement with some kind of Australian tourism board. So that sort of like fills out a lot of their schedule. But yeah, they've been going, and then when they travel around, they're going to a lot of repeat destinations. Houston and Jacksonville. They've been to London way too many times. So I don't know when this is going to change. The first half of the year, I thought, okay, they're still coming out of it. April, we're going to have a couple Apex events. But then second half of the year, things will be better. And then second half of the year, it's continually these like contractually agreed places. And for the most part, like, we know where the UFC is going second half of the year, you guys. I know I'm veering from your question a little bit, but I think I'm just as perplexed as you are as why we're getting this UFC product that doesn't seem to be very dynamic. It seems to be stuck in this formula. And of course, the UFC will tell you, we had these sold out shows for so long once we came out of the pandemic, this long run of sold out shows. Well, that has ended. The show in Brazil was not sold out because if you look at the ticket prices for so many of these events, and credit to them, they did make it to Canada this year, but the ticket prices for these live events are so overpriced that they are not sellouts. The show in Vancouver Vancouver is usually, or Vancouver and Canada, those shows are usually a home run. Some of the first places to sell out. That show did not sell out, at least to my knowledge. I need to go back and fact check that. But as far as I know, that was not a sellout. I thought about going to, I was ready to go to UFC 289 and make the drive up to Vancouver from Portland. But yeah, I wasn't going to pay $300 for nosebleed tickets. Wasn't going to try and pay $1,000 to sit in a somewhat decent seat. So I'm as confused as you are. I can hope next year will be better. The thing is once they start traveling, then the events are just going to feel that much more exciting. Once we get at the Apex shows are just, it's all leftovers. Once they actually have to, like, I think that the quality of cards does get a little bit better when they are trying to sell tickets, or at least sometime. I know the UFC 289 show is not a great card. I know the match, like, there's a lot of criticism about that card, and sometimes that is just timing of who's available. But I do think that cards do get better, or at least feel more exciting when they are in front of a huge live audience in an arena. Even if it's just that the crowd is cheering for local fighters, I think that does help the product a lot, for sure. So that'll help, I think. But the thing is like UFC's broadcast deal with ESPN ends in 2025. Don't know if that's at the beginning or end of 2025. But I think that they've already started to negotiate. I think that process has begun. So whether they're going to re-up with ESPN, I don't know who they would go with if not ESPN, because the thing is like with ESPN, they have access to ABC and of course all the ESPN networks affiliates. Who knows? Maybe they could also do something with like Hulu. There's a lot that there's more that they could explore with ESPN. And it seems like it's been a good partnership for them so far. Yeah, it's interesting to see if they will re-up with them, how much more they will ask for as part of a new broadcast rights deal. But I think that there have been some unintentional consequences, and whether that has literally hurt the UFC in terms of their finances, I don't really think it has, to be honest. They've been posting massive numbers, at least from what we can tell. So if you're making money, if you're making more and more money, it's hard to believe that you need to change your current system. The biggest threat that would change that, I would think, would be the law and PFL, especially if they can pull off a Bellator merger. Those are the two biggest storylines to follow in terms of like radically changing up the UFC product. Yeah. Yeah, I could jab and teep kick someone from across the room for sure. If you ever see me in a street fight, I'm gonna try and jab that guy 300 times. It'll be the lamest street fight you've ever seen. Jimmy, yeah, falling off in terms of lazy cards, but people who fanboy the UFC that defend that UFC is doing great. Yeah, for me personally, I for some reason I just like don't have it in me to complain about UFC cards, because I know that like it is really true that there are great fights and great stories in literally every single event. And if there's a UFC event on and I'm not busy, I'm going to be watching it. Like, that's true. I have an ESPN Plus subscription, so it doesn't cost me anything to watch the events. So I don't really complain about UFC cards, honestly, for me. And I know I'm weird for saying this, but like fights are kind of fights for me. And of course, I always prefer better fights, but you know, whatever. My dad watches baseball, and he turns on baseball most nights. There's baseball on most nights, and he just turns it on. If it's the Marlins, he'll watch it. If it's the Red Sox, he'll watch it. Of course, that's his favorite team. Of course, if it's the Royals, he'll watch it because he lives in the Kansas City area. But it's just he turns it on, and sometimes he'll be reading a book, and it's just he's not. It's almost like that's more what UFC is becoming, rather than these big showcase blockbuster events. So if that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but I think the UFC just wants to reliably have something for every Saturday. So when Saturday comes around, you can turn on ESPN, ESPN Plus, and just have something to watch. I feel like that's a growing value for the UFC rather than like really pumping you up for literally every single event, because they can't. Like they only have 6 days to pump you up for next week's fight night card in the Apex. So it's more of just a regularity thing. And for sure. Yeah, you said not just lazy cards, but weak promotion of great fighters like Pantoja and weird pushes into fighters that are not good, like Sage Northcutt or Mickey Gall. Right, I know. Pantoja, we're like just finding out how interesting this guy really is. And meanwhile, he's just like flown under the radar, despite having wins over the former champion Brandon Moreno. 2 wins, albeit one an exhibition win. But yeah, I know. I don't know. I mean, what's the solution when you have 700 fighters in the roster? I don't know. More platforms to promote fighters, maybe? Perhaps. Maybe utilizing Twitter or Threads more. There's certain like caps that you can hit on like Instagram and YouTube, where it's like if you're putting out more content, you're going to get less traffic on what you're putting out. So you kind of have to like choose what you want to feature. So I don't know what that means for the UFC if they need to like think through different ways to promote fighters. If part of like an ESPN deal involves that they can have more leeway to both use the ESPN Plus app and also the ESPN television programming to promote fighters. I don't know. I wouldn't want to be in charge of promoting 700 fighters. I don't know about you. All right, guys, thanks so much. Really appreciate all of you. Aired today's broadcast on Twitter and Facebook as well. So if you're watching on either of those platforms, really excited to have you. Check me out on Instagram and YouTube as well. But as far as that goes, from beautiful Portland, Oregon, in the American Pacific Northwest, happy to have you join me today on this beautiful day. And we will see you next week, hopefully with a gigantic microphone in front of me. But until then, enjoy this weekend's fights.